Hey everybody, another 40k Leviathan painting video. As promised, we're moving on now from the Space Marines to the Tyranids. Now, this presents a even more, I would say, unique challenge in that you have twice as many miniatures in the box for the Tyranids. And the Tyranids are always going to represent a project where you are doing a huge amount of work, not necessarily for the same reward army composition-wise as for something like Space Marines. You would probably have 20 to 30 Termagants for a single 5-man squad of intercessors, for instance. And that's a lot of work. You have to really prepare yourself for tackling a project this big, and efficiency counts for a lot. So when we looked at my Ultramarines project box, you saw a ton of paints in there. There's probably maybe 24 paints, including texture paints, a variety of like airbrushing and stuff like that. And that's a pretty comfortable way to paint Space Marines. You don't have that many paints sort of like in a large amount, and there are a lot of small details that require different colors on a model like that. Now luckily, Tyranids are even more stripped down color scheme wise than something like Space Marines are. And if we can, we want to pull back the amount of colors we use to like under 10. If I could get it under 10 including basing, I would, but I want to match my bases to the base I did for the Space Marines. They look the same. But there are almost the same number of paints on just the bases that I'm doing for this like project as I'm going to use on the entire series of the Tyranids in here. I'm going to do that through a bunch of different things. Contrast blending and then some very like specific priming that will get a bunch of work done for me instead of even doing something more time consuming like airbrushing, although you could obviously supplement airbrushing if you want as well. So let's take a look at this project, break it down, and we're going to start off with like a Termagant as the concept model and jump forward through some of the other bugs for our last 2 days of painting videos for this Leviathan week. So here I am getting ready to tackle the Tyranid half of the Leviathan box. And to show it to you in real time for realsies, you can see over the weekend I finished off my Space Marines. They are all done and painted. And I also used it as a sneaky way, you can see there with the Carnifex head on the captain's base, to do a little bit of like test painting for how I want to do the Tyranids. Now, the first 2 videos, obviously for my Terminators and my Infernus Marines, that was all of those same techniques got used in the rest of these models. I think the only thing that was slightly different was the Apothecary, who was primed Corax White, as opposed to using that gloss primer, gloss airbrush primer. But even with him, I mixed a bit of gloss varnish into like Abaddon black paint, did the shoulder pad, and hand painted on that Green Stuff World Cobalt Blue to finish these guys off. Mr. Dreadnought even got done, and I'll tell you what, his legs look even smaller now that he's painted, and it still bothers me. So glad to have them done, all finished, and I'm ready to jump into the next project. What a project it is, 45 Tyranid miniatures. I counted the bases instead of trying to count them on the frames. Holy moly, it's a lot. 20 Termagants, 5 Barb Gaunts, 3 Von Ryan's Leapers, 10 Neurogaunts, and then like the 3 Neurotyrant and its little guards. We've got the Carnifex, obviously, the big Predator Carnifex, the Psychophage, and then the Winged Tyranid Prime. That's a lot of miniatures, and so you want to be able to, I mean, on top of building them, which is officially my least favorite part of building toy soldiers now, is building lots of toy soldiers. I like to build small amounts of toy soldiers, but these are push fit, which makes them relatively easy. And they've also got them numbered. Oh, also, sorry, Ripper Swarms. I forgot, you also have to paint Ripper Swarms. I even forgot these were on the frame, but you do get, I think, 3 or 4 bases of Ripper Swarms on top of this. You do get to paint or build these guys numerically, which is nice because you can just count up. So 1 through 4 was my first Termagant, and then 1 through 4 was my first Barb Gaunt as well, off their respective frames. And you can see my first time-saving trick here. I went for some different type of primer. This is a Premier Shake and Spray Rustic Pink Primer. It is exactly what it sounds like, a nice neutral flesh tone of a primer. Weird defined, but this is going to save us an absolute ton of time as the base coat for the bottom of these miniatures. And the sort of like process of doing this. We've basically got these guys, their basic color scheme, and everything we're going to do here is to tint this underlying pink. Think of this like slap chopping, except you're using a colored primer as opposed to like a gray or white or black with zenithal prime job over top of it. And then I picked out my colors. I have, appropriately, Leviathan Purple, Berserker Bloodshade, Black Templar, and I'm going to use some Striking Scorpion Green. Now you'll notice I'm using contrast paints as my base tones. That's because these guys are going to get a dry brush before I start anything else of Flayed One Flesh and Wraithbone over top. And that's going to prepare the miniature for the overall paints. That's it. I'm going to keep this to 6 colors. If I can keep all of these Tyranids to 6 colors, including like contrast, I will save a ton of time going from the primary color, which is sort of like their, I guess like their armor plating, like almost like their primary body part, up through their like sort of chitinous back plates, and then any sort of like weapon bits, eyes, glowing things are going to be in that Striking Scorpion Green. That's it, a 4-color plowlet. The claws are all going to be in that Black Templar, and if I want to go and highlight anything, I'm simply going to mix either the Flayed One Flesh or the Wraithbone into these contrast paints for my highlights. Half dozen colors. That's a big time-saving thing in and of itself. I'm going to restrict myself to this palette. The base, like I said, is almost as many colors. It's Aster Granite, and then I'm going to tint it once again with a bit of is it Goldfag Brown? Yeah, Goldfag Brown. And then, of course, we'll have the Drybrush with Blue Horror and a bit of Corax White. And then finally, the Victory Lap in Abaddon Black. So 11 colors total, half of which are the miniature, half of which are the base. Let's see how this goes. All right, so here is this Termagant all primed up with that spray on primer, and I'm first going to give it a nice rough dry brush with my 2 base tones. I'm going to take that pink up a little bit. So the Flayed One Flesh first. It's a little bit darker than the Wraithbone, and I'm going to use a really old Citadel tank brush here. Nice. I like these old red-handled ones. Dry it off on a bit of paper towel just to get the paint done, and then I'm just going to give it a rough dry brush. And I like to keep it directional, so I try and go as like top down as possible so that the leading edges are, of course, the lightest part. This is going to leave that sort of pink in the recesses and just warm the color up a little bit. And then that Wraithbone, same thing. I don't bother cleaning my brush in between these 2 colors because it gives it a bit of a blend. Dry it off on that paper towel again. Right, until it starts to come through clear, and then a nice rough dry brush, top to bottom, left to right on the Termagant. And that's going to allow for that nice transition of color when we put down the contrast paint, because I'm leaning into the contrast paints for this. Big time saver, and just because they're already pre-thinned, they get into miniatures like this with those nice recesses like really quickly, and basically you're shading down as opposed to shading up. The model's starting as bright as it possibly can be. So now the armor plates, Leviathan Purple, and this is the vast majority of the color that's going to go onto this model, that Leviathan Purple. I'm using, I think, an Artificer Layer Citadel brush for this. This is just in my pile of brushes I pulled out, and it's going to be carefully painted on. And I think the one thing with a technique like this is because you can't really go back, it's hard to clean off the areas that you're going to leave that beige and pink. You just got to be slow and methodical in painting these details. Don't try and rush it, because if you do, you'll get a nice result, and this base tone is saving you a whole bunch of time. So just getting all these armor plates in that purple. I will take a stage later on with that beige if I need to go get it back and clean up any mistakes I make, but for the most part, we're just banging this down as quick as possible. Alright, with all those armor plates done, we're into some Berserker Bloodshade, and I'm going to use this for all the weapons, all of the tongues and teeth, and anywhere where those little sort of like tubey bits, I don't know what else to call them, you can see these little recesses where there are almost like the flesh under the carapace, because there's like the dark upper carapace and the lighter lower carapace. I'm going to hit all these with that Berserker Bloodshade to make them pop. I may go back next time I do one of these and do the whole gun with that pink, just to make it pop out a little bit more. I tried that a bit later on and I liked the effect, but for this one I'm just leaving that the same color as the rest of the Termagant. I noticed looking at the rest of my gaunts later that they were a different color from the rest of the gaunts. So I may go change that later on when I do more of these. But this is, of course, the prototype, the test model, and quickly getting those down, letting them dry means that those highlights will stand out. Same with those little, like, I don't know if those are ears, maybe little vents on the side of the head. He's got them on his tail too. He's got butt ears. I don't really know, but I wanted them to have a bit of shading, and that meant that they needed to be washed down. And this Berserker Blood shade just really strengthens the pink that's already underneath the beige that I've dry brushed on, and makes it sort of like stand out overall. Again, just struggle to keep this on camera. I used a different camera for this, and while it does have much better fidelity, it had a much narrower focus until I changed around. You'll see a little bit later, and I had to keep coming back because now it's focusing on my finger. My apologies. There it is back on screen. And yeah, get that Berserker Blood shade in all those recesses now to let dry. So with those done, we're moving on to Black Templar, and we're gonna do that for all the claws. Anything that's like a sharp sort of stabby bit, the hooves, the backs of the legs. I'm going to base coat all these with that Black Templar, and it gives a nice sort of like overall differential to the colors. So these are nice and quick, and then that's going to allow me to go back and I think I throw some on the actual base. There's a little bit of rock that he's standing on as well. If only I could keep this more on camera. But once it's down, that's pretty much all the base colors finished. So just one little color left to put down with these contrast paints, and that's that Striking Scorpion Green. Just gonna do that for the eyes and the little psychic bits, but I wanted to get it down early and let it dry, along with the rest of these. Just dotting that eye, both sides, and we'll go back and highlight that later. That's pretty much all the contrast paints finished. This guy needs some good sitting and drying time, and we'll wait for that. We're going to throw down the Astro Granite. Quickly get them based, and this guy can sit to one side until all these are good and dry. Now, of course, if you're doing 10 of these at a time, your drying time is the time it takes you to finish number 10, typically. I'd probably paint these in batches of 5. I could probably get, I'd say, not including drying time, because like you do all 5, and then you'd sit back and then give them like a really good, like maybe half hour to dry. Including the basing material. I'd probably do 5 of these guys minus the basing time in an hour. So that's a pretty reasonable, I think, amount of time for like a unit of 5. And of course you need these in 10s. So 2 hours for 10, I think that's pretty good. It's using this process, that's not too terrible. So with everything having been allowed to dry and me figuring out how to get this camera to actually be in a spot where I wasn't going off screen all the time, it's time to do some highlights. And you'll see I'm going to take the same contrast paint I put down, so in this case Leviathan purple. I'm going to throw a little Wraithbone in there. And this is my primary mix. Now the great thing about the Wraithbone, because it's a base paint, it has a lot of pigment in it. And that means when you thin it with the contrast paint, you'll get a nice thin, ready to like go on the model sort of like consistency, and it will allow you to paint those edged highlights. So I'm going to go in and just pick out all the edges of this armor and what you're doing is you're just chasing where it was naturally hiding with the contrast paint anyway and allowing it to continue. I did notice that I need my palette to not be in the shot for me to be able to get this to really focus on the Tyranid itself. But as I move him up, there you go. Now he's gonna pop in. There we go. He pops into focus. See, because I get him actually in the foreground, not like an idiot. As you see, I'm just grabbing those leading edges on the armor and allowing those natural highlights to pop out a little bit further. And I'll do this twice. So going back and getting those double blends done. We're gonna do the same on the gun and all those fleshy bits, a little bit of that Berserker blood shade. Same mix, so we're gonna put that down and then we're gonna throw in some of my Wraithbone to blend. Get a nice mix here. I want it a little bit brighter, a little bit pinker probably, because I want it to actually show up now that it's dry on the tongue. I don't know, those little sort of like fleshy exposed tubes and stuff. All the cabling on the back of the gun. And this is just to give it a nice smooth blend and transition. And make all that stuff pop. And just checking both sides. And just putting those blazes up. Now that Wraithbone is already on my palette, I'm gonna go just do a little bit of like top highlights on the top of the tail, like right where the edges of the armor plates are. And that dry brushing, if I want it to be just a little bit more beige, a little bit more pronounced than a dry brush, because the dry brush will fade to the color underneath it, I'm just gonna go hit it with that Wraithbone. It allows me to clean up the edges around anywhere where I maybe just slopped a little bit extra contrast paint. But it also, see, just using the side of my brush gives me that nice sort of like top-down highlight on all leading edges, and this will just brighten him up that tiny little extra bit around the hooves too there, so that he has like a nice final sort of like bright edge to all of those sort of like leading edges on the tail and those little whatever they are, ears, head ears, triple ear holes. Once I'm satisfied I've found all of them, I just want to dot his eyes. So we're going to get a little bit of that striking scorpion green. And because I've got that Wraithbone already on the palette, I'm just going to dump some down. Get a little mix. And just do a nice bright dot on the eye. Just so it has a cool glow. And even on the bottom edge of the eye, if I want to look like it's kind of, I don't know, like a spawn eye. It's just glowing a little bit extra. And it's super quick and done. A little bit more beige in there just so I can like dot the very edge of the teeth. Oh man, and I just managed to pull it so that it didn't focus. There, we're gonna get the other side and focus. Oh, and it pops out. Oh, terrible. And dot his teeth. That'll make him just a little more angry looking. And now we need to get in there with that last little bit of Wraithbone. I'm gonna mix in some of that Black Templar or Black Legion. You use that too. I think it's the newer one. That'll create a nice dark gray, and that's going to allow us to pick out the leading edges on those claws, all those little hooves, and just kind of blaze it. So they look more intentional, and to create like a nice strong card, like separation between the black and the leading edge. Now that's all dry, and the basing material is solidly dry, we're going to thin down that Mournfang brown so I can show you how to do my bases yet again. If you watch this on the Space Marine videos, this is entirely the same. So you're going to add a good probably 2 parts water to 1 part paint. You're going to dot it around that central bit. You can see it's very thin. Just create like a central sort of like well or reservoir of it. And then get your paintbrush directly in your paint pot. Give it a good swipe, and then just a wet paintbrush to tease out the edges. And the capillary action is going to draw that pigment from the center out into a nice fade and give you that cool rusty middle. And like I've said in the Space Marine videos, you can use this to tint any base you want. You can use different colors. And letting that dry for a bit, it's time for some dry brush. Little blue horror. I got my tissue paper back here. I'm using a flat-ended AK soft brush. And scraping most of it off. And I'm just going to do concentric circles out from the edge. And leave that darkness in the recesses. Get a little bit into the brown, but really you're just trying to make the edge kind of glow. You do want to let this dry well, because otherwise you're going to get that brown into your dry brush. And these are cheap and cheerful, sort of like quick and dirty ways of doing a nice basing effect. Once again, I swear to God, I will. This is me trying to show the cleaning the paintbrush. Now I'm missing the miniature. I will eventually get the hang of this thing staying in focus. I need to keep it central. And a little bit of that Corax white base. I like base paints for dry brushing because they're so heavy in pigment. And they're a little bit thicker, so they tend to like dry off nicely. And we're just going to get the very edge with that nice... I mean, the Corax white's not actually white. It's like a very, very, very light gray. Like a dove gray. But it's perfect for this purpose. And it covers super duper well. And with that all done, give my brush a wash, pop this guy off the handle, and it's time for the victory lap. A little Abaddon black. And we will paint the base rim. You might have to do 2 coats of this because it does have a very light primer on it. So if you get any streakiness after it's dry, or if you thinned your paint too much and you're getting a little bit of the base layer showing through, just go let it completely dry and then go around it again. I think I got it in one go this time though. I don't quite thin my paints for this. And hold them top and bottom. Careful you don't have any paint in your hands when you do this. You're going to mess up your paint job and make yourself mad. And the victory lap around the base. I do find with a light miniature like this too, a black base rim is gonna really make that guy sort of like pop off the tabletop, and you'll really see that sort of stark, like strong contrast between them. It's weird. I keep saying contrast, and we're using contrast paints. I feel so awkward about that. Overusing that word, and he's all done. And there he is, finished. A little layer of that Rust-Oleum chalked, and we are done. Our first test Termagant. 6 colors, not including the base. Give it a go. It really is nothing like limiting your palette to speed things up and allow you to get a huge number of models finished. I do recommend. We talked about this in the last little podcast video we did, but get your process down first, do a test model, and then you can just sit down and hammer out Tyranids for days. So thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow for a Barb Gaunt. Till then, I'm Ash. Happy Wargaming.
Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continue to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Death Ray Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.